Will open for us. Then Professor John Woodward will make a few remarks. He's the director of the International History Institute. He's the director of the Division of Military Education. And he also manages this facility, which is our conference venue today, the Kochen Conference Hall. So very important in terms of this contribution. And then the Consul General from Japan for New England, based here in Boston, Takahashi-san, will make a remark and a greeting, and then we'll carry on with our program. So please, Dean Taylor.
Good morning, everyone. I won't take long up here. I just wanted to welcome you all to Boston University and to Pardee. It's wonderful to see such a great turnout on a very cold Wednesday, the return of winter here in Boston, so it's nice to see you all. I know we'll have a number of students joining when they wake up. They don't know what they're missing. So I want to thank Grant, first of all, for spearheading this conference and meeting today. This is the second big conference he's taken on in the last probably 18 months or so. And so you have very strong shoulders to take on initiatives like this, to look at very important subjects that are very important to the Pardee School, what we do here, but also to acknowledging the threads of history and the importance of a very important historical epoch. I want to welcome and thank the Consul General of Japan, Consul General Takahashi, for being here this morning. And I'd also like to thank the BU Center for the Study of Asia, UCSA, under the leadership of Bob Hefner, who I know will be joining later, and my colleague John Woodward, who plays two roles as the interim director of the International History Institute and as the director of the Division of Military Education. So John has drawn on both his roles to help support and sponsor this event this morning. And I'd also like to welcome our colleagues from the Naval War College and from New Hampshire who came in this morning to partake and participate in this conference. I have to leave myself, unfortunately. I'm particularly interested in the subject, and I was looking through the program and very excited about the topics that you'll discuss today. I'm an Africanist by training, but for some reason I've always had a deep interest in Russian history, and especially Russian imperial history. So I would have loved to have stuck around. I also have a son who lives in Sendai, Japan, so I feel like I've got some vested interest in both. But I wish I could stay with you, but I know it's going to be a really exciting day and a really rich and interesting conversation. So, and I look forward to hearing more about it, and I wish you all the best today, and thanks so much for being here, and welcome.
Good morning. I'm John Woodward, and I thank you all for coming. Let me just very much echo and endorse Dean Taylor's comments. That's because he writes my evaluation. Thank you very much, Dean Taylor, and thank you, Consul General Takahashi. Domo arigatou gozaimashita. Taihen o seiwa ni nareimashita. Grant just taught me that phrase a few minutes ago. Right, Grant? Thank you. Thank you. We also appreciate some non-BU folks who are joining us today. I think we have Naval War College contingent here. Go Army, Big Navy. I want to thank, my friend is here, Colonel Raul Alcala. Colonel, where are you? U.S. Army retired. Colonel Alcala is the commander of the Greater Boston chapter of the Military Order of the World Wars. Thank you for joining us. And Robert Gold is here. Robert is my friend, our friend actually at Boston University, and he's been a very generous sponsor for this conference. I really have to say that it was Grant Rode who envisioned this conference, lobbied for it, advocated for it, created it, organized it, put it all together, made it happen, and really gave us what will be a world-class event. And Grant, from the bottom of my heart, I want you to know I'm going to take full credit for everything you did for this event. So, at any rate, thank you all for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed the conference. Thank you.
So we'll proceed with Consul General Takahashi.
So good morning, Ohayo gozaimasu. Professor Scott Taylor, I think he's gone already, and Professor John Woodward, and of course, you know, Rod-san, a long-time friend of our consulate, and who played a key role in organizing this conference. And Doriak-san over there, you know, president of the Japan-American Society of New Hampshire, another very special friend of Japan. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning once again, and thank you very much for inviting me to this special conference on the 120th anniversary of the Treaty of Portsmouth. It is truly my honor to be here to commemorate this one of the most important historical events for Japanese foreign policy, and to discuss its significance in the current context of a challenging and complex international security environment. My special thanks also go to Professor Chiharu Inaba of Meiji University, who has come all the way from Japan to be part of this remarkable event. The Treaty of Portsmouth, which ended the Russo-Japanese War 2004-2005, is not only significant in modern Japanese history, but also serve as an important milestone in Japan-US relations and the relationship between Japan and New Hampshire. Yesterday, actually, I visited Portsmouth for the very first time, together with Professor Inaba, guided by Doriak-san and his excellent team, and learned that groundwork for successful negotiation at the peace conference was laid by the citizen diplomacy of the people of Portsmouth and the auspices of the New Hampshire state government. The citizens of Portsmouth warmly welcomed the delegations from both nations, and when negotiation became difficult, they organized parties, baseball games, and theatrical performances to encourage the delegates to remain engaged in negotiation. Subsequently, the Wentworth by the Sea Hotel, where delegations from both countries stayed, was preserved thanks to the dedicated efforts by the Japan-American Society of New Hampshire. The city of Portsmouth and its sister city Nichinan, the hometown of Jutaro Komura, and Japan's plenipotentiary in the negotiations, along with the dedicated effort of its citizens and many others. I would like to express my deep appreciation to all those involved. In 2010, recognizing the crucial role of citizen diplomacy in this historic treaty, the New Hampshire State Legislature unanimously voted a bill designating September 5th as a Portsmouth Peace Treaty Day. Each year, the governor of New Hampshire issues a proclamation to commemorate this important day in New Hampshire history. Additionally, in order of the bell that rang at the signing of the treaty, a bell ringing ceremony is held every day, September 5th, precisely at 3:47 p.m. in both Portsmouth and Nichinan, to express a shared desire for peace. Last year's ceremony in Portsmouth was attended by U.S. Senator Jin Shaheen and Japanese Ambassador to the U.S. Shigeo Yamada, among others. As we mark the 120th anniversary of the Treaty of Portsmouth, I look forward to celebrate this historic occasion together with all of you in this year in Portsmouth. Looking back in history in Japan-US relations were first established on March 31st, 171 years ago, by Commodore Matthew Perry, who was born in Newport, Rhode Island. And last week, I was honored to be present at the Rhode Island State House to witness the adoption of the historic resolutions to designate this date, March 31st, as their Japan Day. During the Russo-Japanese War, Professor Alfred Maham, who served as president of the U.S. Naval War College, is said to have influenced Akiyama Saneyuki, the strategist, staff officer of the combined fleet, whose tactics led to Japan's victory in the Battle of Tsushima, known in Japan as the Battle of the Sea of Japan. After 80 years of alliance following World War II, the United States has become Japan's most important partner in diplomacy and security. At the first Japan-US summit meeting this past February, Prime Minister Ishiba and President Trump shared their views on the increasingly severe and complex security environment and affirmed their commitment to pursuing a new golden age for Japan-US relations and working closely together to realize a free and open Indo-Pacific, elevating Japan-US relations to another height. Here in the region, various exchanges between the U.S. Naval War College in Newport and Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force are strengthening the deterrence and response capability of Japan-U.S. alliance. Furthermore, Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, where negotiations for the Treaty of Portsmouth took place, continued to play a vital role as a key base for submarine construction and maintenance, and contributing to the security of Japan's ally, the United States. Japan remains committed to working closely with the United States to address strategic and security challenges in the international relations, and seeks to deepen Japan-US relations not only in the security field but also in all fields: politics, business and economy, and culture, science and technology, academic exchange, sports, and tourism, and you name it. So today I do look forward to active discussions between experts from Japan and the United States on the Treaty of Portsmouth and the Russo-Japanese War, which are of great historical significance not only to both nations but also to the contemporary international relations. The consulate is also committed to further promoting academic exchanges between Japan and the region, and we do look forward to working with all of you in this endeavor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Consul General, for making those remarks. And it's a pleasure to have you here in New England and to have a chance to work with you for these 3 years while you're here, and with your staff, who's very helpful and cooperative with everything I've been trying to do. I'll say that in 1977, when I was writing my doctoral dissertation in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and I went to the Athenaeum there, that the records and documents for the Russo-Japanese Treaty were sitting in a great pile on a desk in the middle of the Athenaeum. And I knew that these things needed to be sorted, so people here today, by 2005, had put together a record and a centenary anniversary. So if you go to Portsmouth, as Professor Eric Goldstein and I did last September 5th, and heard the ringing of the bells that you talked about, that there's a welcoming group there, there's a wonderful exhibit. You can visit the Wentworth Hotel and so forth. So, I encourage you, and I'm living now in Rhode Island, with my neighbors, Matt Perry, the 5th generation descendant of the Commodore, and family historian, so I'm able to participate in that history where you are based in Boston, but really for all New England. And I think these are the two most important aspects of Japanese-American relationships are tied in with these two particular events. So here we've got the program for the day. I've already mentioned we've got 3 panels. You've seen the program. I'm not going to dwell on this. It's a very full and rich program, and we'll go through it and have a lunch in the middle where we'll be able to relax and talk with each other a bit more, 2 breaks. Sponsors, we've talked about these already: the Center for the Study of Asia, Division of Military Education, International History Institute, here the Killichan Honors College, which is our venue. The Theodore Roosevelt Association is supplying the funds so that we can video record this and put it online so that we can have a broader distribution of the results and the findings of the conference. Private sponsor Robert Gold has helped us with the accommodation for our guest speakers here. And then some BU faculty have also taken some of the research funds. I appreciate all of you who have come at your own expense to come to this because there's great pressure on the Academy right now in terms of budgets that is increasing at the present time. And so that all of us are willing to participate. It's not only the sponsors on this list, but all of you have come today. I'm very grateful to you for that. We have the speakers who meet, the faculty members. I told you the 50 students and the public attendees, not only from the Boston area, but also from other places in New England. Thank you very much. The Party School is having its 10th anniversary. The celebration was last Friday. This is the mission statement of the Party School. So it's 10 years now. Party School brought together the Department of International Relations, combined it with the regional institutes, combined it with 2 topical centers, the Global Development Policy Center, the Party Center for the Study of the Longer Range Future, to look out to the forefront. So they're all under one umbrella now. Having you joining us is very meaningful to us to participate in the examination of doing this promotion, communication of interdisciplinary research, which we'll hear a lot about today, and that affect the human condition, war and peace. These are big issues, and these are things that are considered here at the Party School. So let's proceed, and the panel members, well, the panel members are coming up and having a seat here, and John Woodward, if you want to come on up, and we'll get started with our first panel. I'll mention that our first speaker, Professor Jim Holmes, from the Naval War College, got to Pawtucket. He was feeling so ill, he turned around and went back, and so he's not going to be here this morning. But Professor John Maurer, who's the second one up, works with Jim, lecturing in the Strategy and Policy Department at the U.S. Naval War College. He knows Jim's talk. He will actually say Jim's words. Now, it's basically Corbett, the great naval tactician, who's the opener with Jim Holmes. Second is the strategist, Alfred Thayer Mahan, which is John Maurer. It's a great debate over what the impact of their thinking, their thoughts are on naval affairs. And it happens that with John giving Jim's talk, we know who's going to win that debate today, because John is the Mahan professor at the Naval War College. So anyway, a preview. So why don't you come on up, and panelists, please have a seat.
Good morning, all, once again, and I have some really good news. I'm going to be very brief for this panel. I'm the moderator. My most important job is to serve as the timekeeper, to make sure that our distinguished guests adhere to their time limits, and I'll do that. I have my trusty chronometer here. But this panel will be talking about the war itself. We have distinguished experts. It's unfortunate that Professor Holmes is not able to join us, but I think we have a very worthy replacement with Professor Marr, so he'll be our doubleheader. It is the baseball season. This will be our doubleheader. He will start. He's going to give 15 minutes to each side, the tactical, the strategic, and then we will transition to Professor Kozyrev, who joins us from Endicott College. And if you've been to Endicott College in Beverly, Massachusetts, lovely place. Thank you very much. And also affiliated with Harvard University is an associate at the Fairbanks Air Base. Yes. And then we're very honored to have from Brown University, Watson Institute, Dr. Goldstein, who will be joining us. So that'll be the speaking order. Our first speaker will get 30 minutes because it's a doubleheader, and then 15 minutes and 15 minutes. I'll keep the time, and I'll give you little signals and size and so on if you tend to go over. And then we will open it up to questions and answers from the audience. Okay. So that's the game plan. Let me turn it over to Professor Marr, joining us from the Naval War College. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, John. Let me go forward. Speaking for my colleague, Professor Holmes, who lectures on Julian Corbett at the Naval War College. Julian Corbett wrote a history of the Russo-Japanese War. It was not published in his lifetime. It was a classified history for the Admiralty. It was eventually published many years later by the Naval Institute in Annapolis. It's a big 2-volume account, and we read sections of it in the strategy and war course that we teach at the Naval War College. So this classified work from the time of the Russo-Japanese War remains very much a study that is worthwhile looking at today. It expresses a lot of Sir Julian Corbett's thoughts on naval strategy, maritime strategy. As Grant mentioned, quite often there is seen a rivalry between Sir Julian Corbett and his contemporary Alfred Thayer Mahan. Who is the best strategist on naval warfare, maritime strategy? Jim will tell you, and I agree with Jim, that this is a false rivalry that is often set up. Corbett himself said that 9 times out of 10 he would agree with Mahan and Mahan's strategic theories. So keep in mind there is actually a great deal of overlap between Mahan's thoughts, strategic theories, and Sir Julian Corbett's theories. Sir Julian Corbett, by the way, was trained as a lawyer, but he wasn't interested in the law. Instead, he took up a literary career. He wrote books of fiction, and then gravitated toward naval history, and became a celebrated author at the time. In fact, he was hired to be a professor of strategy at the British equivalent of the Naval War College before the First World War. And his classic work is Some Principles of Maritime Strategy, published in 1911. This book was read by Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill knew Sir Julian Corbett and liked Corbett's work a great deal. Corbett, in writing about the Russo-Japanese War, it's important to keep this in mind, is drawing lessons from this war that can be applied by Britain in some future war. So keep that in mind. This is not history for history's sake. It is history to try to educate naval officers in Britain to think about some future war. And in particular, at this point in time, thinking about some future war between Britain and Germany. Well, why was Japan successful in this war? And Corbett wants to highlight the success story of Japanese naval strategy during this war. He sees this as a model, in fact, for the type of strategy that Britain should follow in some future war. Again, he wants to highlight the lessons that can be learned from the Japanese experience in the war. One of the key elements that Corbett likes to talk about is not just how you get command of the sea, control the sea, defeat the enemy's fleet. He also wants to talk about how the Japanese Navy can work with the Japanese Army in combined operations, what the British would call combined operations, we today would call joint operations. How does the Navy and the Army work together? The key element in this war for Japan is to have local sea control, the waters around Japan, connecting Japan to the Korean Peninsula and to the Chinese mainland of Manchuria. It's critical, so that the Japanese army can then be projected ashore to achieve Japan's objectives in this war. Its overall objectives is to deny Korea and southern Manchuria to Russia. Russia was expanding at this time into China. The fear that Japanese leaders had that in the long run Russia was also going to take over Korea as well. And so for Japan, it's key to make sure that Russia doesn't have control over southern Manchuria and Korea. So Corbett is writing about how the Japanese Navy can support the Japanese Army to seize this territory ashore. Again, he talks about this territory across from Japan in Korea and southern Manchuria that is important to Japan's security. Again, the topic is that Corbett's trying to talk about is how the Army, Japanese Army and Navy can work together to achieve their objectives on the mainland of Asia. Corbett also wants to highlight that these two services have to work together. The problem that armed services can have is that they might want to pursue divergent strategies. And that will be counterproductive. If you have an Army strategy, a Navy strategy, and they don't agree with one another, the result will be you won't be able to achieve your overall objectives, your political objectives. For Corbett, the Army is being used to help support the Japanese Navy's objectives. And one of the key objectives in this is to destroy a Russian squadron that is based at Port Arthur. One of the criticisms that is raised of Japanese naval strategy in this war is that Admiral Togo, the commander of the Japanese naval forces, was too defensive in orientation. He wasn't aggressive enough. Corbett goes out of his way to defend Admiral Togo and say that throughout this, Togo was very good at risk management, when to be aggressive, when to take risks, and when to be more cautious and prudent in his actions. I'll have more to say about that in a moment about Mahan. What Corbett wants to highlight is that overall Japan's naval maritime strategy in this war is defensive, trying to control sea lines of communication between Japan and the mainland. Again, one of the criticisms of Admiral Togo was that he was too defensive, not aggressive enough, offensive enough in trying to seek out and destroy a Russian squadron based in Port Arthur. The problem was that Togo really couldn't do that because the Russian fleet generally stayed under the protection of the fortifications of Port Arthur. And when it did come out to fight in the Yellow Sea Battle of August 10, 1904, Togo was careful not to risk his fleet so that he would lose his own ships because he knew they couldn't be replaced. Again, here's a photograph of the famous Japanese Admiral Togo. And again, local command, controlling the sea lines of communication between Japan and Korea and southern Manchuria is good enough for Japan to be able to achieve their objectives. Let me go on. Corbett was also critical of Russian naval strategy. He has actually less to say about the Russian side than about the Japanese side. But the Japanese, his criticism of the Russian naval operations is that they were too defensive in this war. Now, there was one Russian admiral, Admiral Makarov, who was with the Port Arthur squadron. He was more aggressive in his orientation, but he was a victim of his own virtues. He sortied out on his flagship, the battleship Petropavlovsk. It hit a mine, it went down with the admiral. Corbett said that, believed that if Makarov had survived, that Russia would have done a lot better in this war. In fact, maybe they could have won this war if there had been a more aggressive Russian admiral in charge of the naval forces in the Far East. For Corbett again, do something, just don't sit there. What eventually happens to the Russian squadron at Port Arthur it is destroyed by the Japanese army that lays siege to Port Arthur and eventually brings some heavy artillery to sink the Russian warships at anchor in Port Arthur. Again, for Professor Holmes highlighting that at the Battle of Tsushima, what a knockout blow that was, where Admiral Togo becomes more aggressive against the Russian Baltic fleet that is coming around. Okay. Corbett, by the way, was a follower or reader, close student of the Prussian military theorist Karl von Clausewitz, and tried to adopt Clausewitz's strategic theories, apply them to war at sea. Corbett is quite explicit about the debt that he owes to Clausewitz. Clausewitz is another book that we read in the curriculum at the Naval War College. Alfred Thayer Mahan, by the way, tried to read Clausewitz and found it too confusing. He said, I don't get anything out of it, but I think there was other sources. Well, here's a photograph of Sir Julian Corbett, and I'll move on to my talk now about Alfred Thayer Mahan. Mahan, born in 1840. He is the son of Dennis Hart Mahan, who was a professor of engineering and tactics at the military academy at West Point. The Civil War generals who attended West Point were his students in the American Civil War. He was chosen to come to Newport to be a professor of strategy. There, the first professor of strategy at the Naval War College. And he was chosen in part because of the reputation of his father, Dennis Hart Mahan, being such a great teacher at West Point. In many ways, he exceeded what his father had done as a teacher. His most famous book is The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, which, like many great books, started as lectures to students at the Naval War College. Mahan wanted to reach a wider audience, though. He wanted to reach an informed public, and so he took his lecture notes and turned it into this book that was an instant classic when it was published in 1890. It is worthwhile noting, however, that Mahan sent his manuscript to several publishers who turned it down. They couldn't make sense of it. They didn't like it. Eventually, Little Brown Company in Boston took a bet on Mahan, and boy, it really paid off for Little Brown. Mahan overnight was a celebrity. His work of history that he did garnered him a reputation not only with people reading public, but also within the academy. He was elected to serve as president of the American Historical Association, which says something about his reputation as an author. He was a prolific author, 20-some books, 130 plus some articles he wrote in his lifetime. He died in December of 1914. His most famous work, though, is this work, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. The very first sentence of the book tells you the book's thesis. And it is that great powers are involved almost inevitably in clashes. And that the history of the international system is that of wars between great powers. And underlying the tension between great powers is economic competition as well. The book is very Darwinian in a very stark way. Mahan is writing to not only educate officers at the Naval War College, he's trying also to give a clarion call to the American public in the 1890s and at the beginning of the 20th century, that the 20th century, he predicts, is going to be a century of great power conflict, and that the United States will get drawn into these conflicts. In 1893, there was the Great Columbian Exhibition that took place in Chicago. The Great Columbian Exhibition was a world's fair to highlight American industrial, technological, agricultural power. Mahan's books, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, is coming out at the same time when the United States is coming out in a big way, in a showy way, to say that the United States has emerged as an industrial power stronger than any other industrial technological power in the world. It has supplanted Britain as the workshop of the world, the leading workshop of the world. Again, it's no accident that Mahan's books about how the United States is going to get caught up in these great power struggles coincides with the underlying changes that are taking place in the international economy. In one of the books, a collection of articles pulled together in a book, The Interest of American Sea Power, Present and Future, a very policy-oriented account where he highlights the United States is going to have to play a larger role in world affairs. The United States has to take control over the Hawaiian Islands. At this point in the 1890s, he's afraid that Japan is going to take over the Hawaiian Islands, and he wants the United States to have those islands to protect the Western Hemisphere, but also to be able to project American power across the Pacific as well. At this time, Mahan is saying in his articles and his book, is highlighting that the United States is going to have to play a larger role in world affairs, just because we have becoming an economic superpower. Again, the growing production of the country is going to demand it. There's something inevitable about further engagement and involvement of the United States in world affairs. In 1900, another book he publishes, again, collection of articles that he's written, called The Problem of Asia. What is the problem of Asia? Well, he sees Russia expanding throughout Asia from the Middle East all the way out to the Far East. And this is a zone between 30th and 40th parallels that he sees weak states that are going to be contested, part of the so-called Great Game between the British Empire and the growing Russian Empire. Now, for Mahan, the important stakes are out in the Far East in China. Will Russia become so strong that it becomes the dominant power in China? And can Britain somehow thwart or contain Russian expansion in Asia? At this time, Mahan and many around him don't think that Britain is up to the task, that other countries have to join in with Britain to contain growing Russian power. And what are those powers? Well, Mahan calls them the Teutonic powers. An alliance, if you will, not a formal one, but a combination of Germany, the United States, and Britain, because all of their interests are the same, which is to keep an open door in China and make sure that Russia isn't the dominant power in China. This is one of the key themes of American foreign policy, the 1890s down to our own time. What is the relationship between Russia and China? And can you keep those two countries apart from one another? Again, for Mahan, he sees Germany, the United States, and Britain having a common interest here in containing Russian power, sort of a proto-Atlantic alliance, except here projected out to Asia. At the time, of course, there were other people who were calling for this, most notably in Britain, Joseph Chamberlain, the father of Austin and Neville Chamberlain, was also thinking along these lines as well, that Britain has to have the support of Germany and the United States. Mahan also thought, though, that this Teutonic group should have Japan as a partner as well. So these four powers that he saw would be the powers that would be able to contain Russia in Asia. Again, not a formal alliance, but that the U.S. would be working with these three other powers. Now, Mahan's not the only one who's writing about this at the time. Brooks Adams, the grandson and great-grandson of two American presidents, is also writing about this in his best-selling book, America's Economic Supremacy. Again, people are aware of the growth of the United States as an industrial and technological power. And in it, the book, Brooks Adams highlights that the United States is going to have to buttress Britain in world affairs. The British-led international order needs to have support. Britain can no longer maintain it itself. And in particular, again, the fear that somehow Chinese labor put together in an industrial system that is hostile to the U.S. Is going to be of great danger to American security. Mahan and the problem of Asia is also highlighting that at the core of this combination of Germany, Japan, Britain, and the United States, Britain and the United States are the two closest powers. There's an internal combination that's closer among those four. He's highlighting that the United States has to play this larger role in world affairs to uphold the international system. And Theodore Roosevelt, part of that circle, is also highlighting that the U.S. is going to have to take over the role that Britain has normally played of being the great balance of power force in the international system. Well, war. In February 1904, the war begins. The Japanese fleet undertakes an attack with the Port Arthur squadron of Russian forces. Mahan is highly critical of the Russians. They have a squadron of cruisers in Vladivostok and a battle fleet at Port Arthur. And Mahan says, like Corbett, that the Russians should have been more aggressive in the use of their fleet. Instead, the Japanese army is able to destroy the squadron at Port Arthur. And as you can see by Mahan's language here, the passivity of the Russian Port Arthur squadron, that they allowed their throats to be cut like stalled cattle. Again, that Russia should have been more aggressive in the use of their fleet in this war and not have it be destroyed in port. Now, one of the problems of Mahan's problem of Asia is that he sees Germany as being a partner in this bloc. Well, we know that Germany is out to change around the international system, and just as much as said Russia is trying to do at this time. And here you see Kaiser Wilhelm and Tsar Nicholas in Russia together. Kaiser Wilhelm is encouraging the Tsar to go out in the Pacific. In fact, in one of his messages to his cousin, and remember they're cousins, Kaiser Wilhelm says, "I'll be the Admiral of the Atlantic, you be the Admiral of the Pacific." Well, the Russian Baltic Squadron that steamed 18,000 miles from the Baltic Sea only to be destroyed at Tsushima, they would never have gotten there without the support of Germany. The Hamburg-America line is the line that carries the coal, the fuel that's required to send the fleet to the Far East. By the way, the coal that's being used by the Russian fleet is Cardiff coal. It's coal coming from Wales, from Britain, and carried on German ships to French ports in the French colonial empire. The last place the Baltic Squadron stopped was at Cam Ranh Bay in modern-day Vietnam. Russia and France were allies of one another. Talk about globalization here. You know, countries cooperate. By the way, the British didn't want to sell their coal to the Russians. They wanted to help their Japanese ally, but they couldn't keep track of where the coal was going. The Germans would buy it and say, "Oh, we're sending it to Hamburg, you know, to light up our factories and houses." But the reality was the coal was going, was also not only going to Hamburg, but also to the Russian squadron in the Far East. Well, here's Togo with Akiyama right next to him on the bridge of the Mikasa, steaming into battle against Admiral Rozhesvensky's Baltic Squadron, and the famous standard launched by, hoisted by Admiral Togo before the battle. Very much like Admiral Nelson at the Battle of Trafalgar. You know, everyone is expected to do their utmost duty, to do their duty. Togo very conscious of this naval history, wanting to have a Japanese Trafalgar here over the Russian force. Togo, great admirer of Mahan's works, seeing himself as a Nelson, pulling off the big battle in which the enemy's fleet is annihilated, and that's exactly what happened. There were 7 Russian battleships against 4 Japanese battleships. First-class battleships. There's more Russian ships than that. but these are the main Russian units. Look what happens to them. 5 sunk, 2 captured. The Russian Bolshevik squadron is destroyed in this battle by Admiral Togo. It's a great example of an overwhelming, crushing defeat being inflicted upon an enemy, which set up the Treaty of Portsmouth and Theodore Roosevelt being able to bring these 2 countries to the table, both countries realizing that a continuation of the war was in neither of their interests. The Treaty of Portsmouth being signed here, as you can see, Sergei Witte in the Japanese delegation. Now, lessons for America. The Russian fleet was divided between the European waters and Asian waters. For Mahan, trying to give lessons for Americans is that in the future, before the Panama Canal is finished, that the U.S. Navy should not be divided between the Atlantic and the Pacific. Concentration of force is key. It's key to him. He believes that Russia lost the war because it didn't keep its fleet concentrated, either in European waters or out in Asian waters. If they had, the Russians would have had a more than 2-to-1 superiority in naval strength over Japan. Japan would not have been able to get control of the sea lanes in Northeast Asia. Now, there's some problems with Mahan's strategy. Could you swing all these forces from Europe? But nonetheless, this is the big lesson that Mahan is trying to draw away for an American audience. And again, it's a vital consequence that the American people know this. He's afraid, by the way, that public opinion will call for a division of the fleet. That if the fleet is concentrated in the Atlantic, the people who live in California and Oregon and Washington will say there's no Navy here to protect us. That the fleet should be divided. And he says, no, we don't want to do that because if we do, the result will be that the United States could be defeated in some future war. After the Russo-Japanese War, Mahan comes to a conclusion that the bloc that he had called about in the problem of Asia, of the Teutonic powers and Japan, that was no longer viable. After the Russo-Japanese War, he sees Japan as a rising power on the world scene that can threaten American interests in the Far East and China. And so he looks and says that Japan is a potential enemy, not a partner. More importantly for Mahan, he's very frightened by the rise of German power. From 1908 on, Mahan's articles are, he's maintaining a drumbeat, which is that Germany is going to be the next enemy of the U.S. and that Germany is the main threat to the United States in the 20th century. A Germany first strategy, if you will. So Mahan, his views changed from the time of the problem of Asia to where 8 years later he's looking at a combination of Japan and Germany as being the most dangerous threat to the United States, not Russia. And on that, I'll end. Thank you.
So we'll take questions at the end of the panel, and you can direct them to the panelists. So now, our next speaker will be Professor Kozyrev. You're going to give us the Russian perspective.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here. It's an honor to be hosted by the BU and this great panel. And my topic is actually the Russia's military lessons. We've already heard from John's presentation that Russia has been considered as passive, and so hence Russia for the future battles and future encounters actually learned quite a few lessons. So I'm going to my slides are more dense, but I try to get through within my time which I have. All right, so I outlined. I just have a few misperceptions and planning issues with the Russian military prior to the war. I just highlight some of them. Then I'm not going to speak about the battles themselves. I think there's a huge literature. We can go to Kichikara, Togo, and we can go to
Christopher Martin's book and John Westwood's book. So they all describe those encounters very well. So I'm just like providing some maps and just so that everybody would see. Causes of Russia's defeat outlaid the causes of Russia's defeat, just a kind of couple of bullet points, and then just say a few words about the hardware issues and capabilities of the parties, and then I have 5+ lessons, major lessons from Russia, and then we have this in the Russian, especially the Russian literature. The Russians had lots of debates about whether actually the Philip Colomb theory. I will tell more about this, but revised after the end of this war. So we have this first breakfast for defeat, which was based on some perceptions by the Russian commanders, including Minister of War, and was commander of the forces in the Far East, Russian forces in the Far East, Kropotkin, who believed that actually Japan would not dare actually fight against the great power such as the Russian Empire. So that's why the Russians focused mostly on containing the Western powers instead of getting themselves prepared for encounters with Japan. But yes, there was Admiral Makarov. You've seen already this picture. Who actually predicted exactly the story of this war. In his 1900 report, he just described what would happen, and that actually happened. So these are his major points, including the Japanese occupying Korean Peninsula, then actually turning away the Russian fleet, excuse me, then move on to the Kwantung Peninsula, further to Manchuria, and concentrate more forces faster than the Russians. Actually, as a result, the possession of Port Arthur was on their plans, and then they believed that the land defenses of Port Arthur were insufficient, despite all the reports by other generals that we just have an absolutely very huge. Port Arthur is a great fortress, so we are absolutely all set in terms of protecting it. These are I'm not going to describe, these are the war plans. So what the Russians would actually probably underestimate the role of the Japanese Navy and overestimate the role of their Navy, of the Russian Navy. Right, so that is the plan. And Japan's plan was actually trying kind of go it alone, just fighting Russia alone, utilizing Russia's actually unpreparedness for the strike, for the military action, especially for fast strike, immediate strike against the Russian forces. And then the priority by Japanese commanders, and including Admiral Togo, were to actually secure Japan's supremacy at sea, and then occupy Korea. So John had described the joint operation, the importance of joint operations. And that was the case, and then informed by somehow by some wrong calculations that actually the Trans-Siberian Railway could not actually, capacity was very limited, so the Russians would not be able to accumulate more troops in Manchuria within the next 6 months than probably 140,000. So, but Russians managed to actually accumulate more. Russia actually was preparing for a concentrated strike, so that's why probably they somehow ignored a little bit. They were very hopeful about the resilience of the Port Arthur, including the Navy, which actually based there, and the fortress itself. So they tried to, and General Kuropatkin's idea was actually we need to secure gradually strengthening and preparing for the transition of our force to the offensive. So that was, and that actually lasts for 7 months, and then lost a lot of time, right? So these are the excellent, actually, resource, Japanese resource on the major battles, and they give the description of these battles and how they went, and you could click on them. It's very interactive, not on this slide though, but it's a copy. But these are the major 10 land battles of war in certain order. And this is a very interesting, I found information from one of the library, Gifu Prefecture Library, about the actual balance of forces during the land operations. And especially it's interesting to look at actually also losses of both like troops, and Japan's losses were greater in the battle of Port Arthur. So it was interesting because other naval battles, of course, and you'll see in Tsushima, the Japanese losses were much lower. Right, so the naval battles, they are all blue here, and we have quite a few. Most of them major 4 battles, but we have some kind of simultaneously conducted battles in different areas. So these are all described here. Of course, the significance of the fortress, the Port Arthur, for Russia was important, and actually that was one of the causes why Japan was so much obsessed with like Russia's presence and increasing Russia's presence, including the railway, Manchuria Railway, throughout Manchuria. So that was one of the probably the key the core of this whole encounter. I just would describe the major flaws that actually led to defeat, which was the economic and military technical backwardness of Russia. You could see a lot of encounters, a lot of accounts describing how they actually managed to repair their battleships, and even converting some of the trade ships into the battleships. And that was actually the case. Strategic miscalculation, I just mentioned this, lack of unanimity among the commanders, imperfection of management structures, weak development of the whole region, and it is pretty weak developed, by the way. Embezzlement and bribery in the army, underestimation of the armed forces of Japan, remoteness from the theater of military operations, serious shortages of supply of troops. Some interesting assessments, I would say. One, Walt Albro's assessment: the good generalship decided the final outcome. So he believed that the commanders were actually not so good. It's a key issue that already we have seen in the previous presentation, that yes, Russia's passive kind of approach to the whole war and approach, and these are kind of already some lessons for the Russians that hey, we don't need to stay and stay low and wait. So because the enemy could attack suddenly, right? And planning was very important. Example of passivity, absolutely, the Tsushima battle, and the Admiral Rozhdestvinsky, who was the commander of the 2nd Squadron, the Baltic Squadron. Yes, they just made a heroic trip, 18,000 miles. You've seen this great map from Joe's presentation. Yeah, but his idea was just to break through. He just was choosing 3 straits, okay, where would I go? And of course, Admiral Toga predicted where he would be going and was ready for this. So he decided to break through and run away instead of like encountering and fighting. So passive tasks, he put this in passive tasks. He didn't, in the literature they said it didn't draw out actually a plan. And then, and very important, they refused to conduct reconnaissance, so Japanese knew more about what actual Russian fleet was doing, so they were very well organized in terms of reconnaissance and surveillance. So these are the outcome of this very interesting map, and the losses, including the Russian losses, and we've seen how many actual battleships are lost, but these are the the troops as well. Hardware capabilities. Interesting that Russian Navy was very kind of mixed, incompatible. I just went and described some lessons in the second. You'll see why this happened. And actually the Japanese Navy was absolutely superior speed. The artillery had a higher rate of fire. That was very important. And these are like some examples described here actually in terms of why this was important, and the number of hits sometimes destroyed the even more better prepared and armored battleships of the Russians. And issues with rangefinders, the Russians even launched torpedoes, and they tried to use the artillery, but many of their shells actually didn't get to the target. So munition was high explosive or not, at some point were not as efficient as the Japanese ones. Shipbuilding. So yes, there was a previous strategy from 1897 in Japan to build, because they were actually prepared for this final encounter with the Russians. So, but they actually focused on building the armored fleet, heavy armored fleet. So, and this heavy armored fleet could not navigate too far away, but it was limiting the navigation area, but it was crucial for continuous supply. So, what actually Japan benefited from this. Artillery used high explosive. I already mentioned this, and the speed I've already mentioned is much higher than the speed of the Russian Navy. Russia had been debating what kind of navy we're going to have, and there was one school which was Mahan Colomb school, and the so-called Young school, French school. The French school was focusing mostly on using not only the big battleships but also the small, heavily armed vessels to combat larger battleships. So Admiral Makarov actually represented the French school, this Jean Nicole school, and that was probably his advantage. That's why he was so effective when he assumed the commandership in March 1904. Unfortunately, he got them on the mine. So, some lessons. Poor preparation for war, not ready for a surprise attack. And I have a quote from Christopher Martin, who said that yes, it was like absolutely surprise attack, and which actually Japanese used later during the Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941. Russian Navy didn't have any kind of coherent concept of war with Japan, and were unable to prepare, and very mixed, as I said, the fleet assembled in the Far East, and they had some of the interaction with coastal artillery was not envisaged. Lesson 2. Role of tactical reconnaissance, I already mentioned during the Tsushima battle, and these are more examples, including the reconnaissance actual operations, even near the distant approaches to Port Arthur, so that they tried to improve, and especially when Makarov arrived, but after March 8th until April 13, when he was actually killed on the mine in his battleship. And very important is that the question about the development of light forces tactics, I just found the 5 most important, interesting areas we can discuss, maybe especially for those who are have better expertise in the military and naval operations. So the short range of torpedoes, so that was the big issue for the Russians and Japanese as well. So that actually pushed them. They could not actually reach with their torpedoes, and all the torpedoes they launched were actually they missed. Small mine boats was another kind of innovation because since the torpedo range was short, so they started to apply small mine boats that to suddenly and kind of especially in the dark to approach the Japanese battleships and launch their mines. Cruising operations were limited. Yes, absolutely. They had some cruisers in Vladivostok, but they tried to kind of preserve them. They didn't use them, but otherwise could have. They didn't have enough of them, but some Japanese communications could have been, if the cruisers were applied, could have been disrupted. Mines as offensive weapon. That's interesting that how they redesigned the whole idea how to use mines, and they used defensive mines for offensive purposes. And Japanese started first. They started using mines to actually prevent the Port Arthur squadron to leave the area, and that was very successful. That's what the outcome was. Actually the death of the passing of the commander in April, and then Russians started to using also mine layers and destroyers, but not only for torpedo attacks, but mine laying, because they didn't have specific ships for this, so they started to invent. Same way as the Russians now in Ukraine, and Ukrainians and Russia-Ukraine war are using different inventions, like just from the air, how to improve the particular tactics, especially how to improve the usage of certain technologies. And minesweeping, they have been successful examples of minesweeping, especially the tactics of, they created the so-called minesweeping convoy, and that was very successful. So they almost didn't lose any any like those minesweeping ships. Naval-based defense from the sea was very important, and actually Makarov himself issued instructions on the defense on the raid to try to actually create maneuverable forces and to set up the patrolling daily and at night to protect approaches to the passage to the inner raid. Japan failed to bottle up the Russian fleet in the inner raid, rose instead in Port Arthur, losing 25 fireships. And Navy ground force coordination very important, and Port Arthur demonstrated that the two attempts were not successful by Japanese to seize Port Arthur. The third was successful though. And there was a new experience, and this is an example of how the Russians used this. Final slide is major lessons from the naval battles. So these are the kind of description of the three major lessons. Those who were kind of serving in the Navy absolutely learned from this, especially the Port Arthur battle. Admiral Makarov approached, just accepted the idea of new tactical in March 1904, of naval battle, the struggle between disparate naval forces using all types of weapons, not just an artillery dueling between armored ships. The Yellow Sea battle, some people say, oh, that was not so important, but it was a first attempt to get through, break through, go to Vladivostok, and of the Russian first squadron from Port Arthur, and they tried to break through, and the battle emphasized the advantages of separate maneuvering in detachment, the importance of advantages in speed, increasing role in large caliber artillery, decisive importance of organizing the control of the fleet, and the need for reliable means of communication. Yes, the Japanese even could jam the radio for the Russian fleet, the Navy, right? And so the Japanese were more advanced. They also remind the Ukraine today. Need the centralized control of sighting and firing. Centralized control is very, very important because previous battles, Japanese actually were not very kind of centralized, so they were a little bit random usage of the artillery. And Tsushima, finally, great advantage of the envelopment maneuver tactics over the tactics for combat in parallel courses. So they made a kind of revolution in this. The battle demonstrated the advantages of separate maneuvering and detachment, the need to organize the interaction of all naval forces, and the increased importance of fight forces in battle, allied forces in battle, along with the continuous tactical reconnaissance. And finally, so there has been debate in Russia whether or why actually was this idea of the Mahan-Coulomb theory that the grand battle is important for the naval encounters, and actually the experiences of the Russia-Japan war were like kind of dismissing this, probably the validity of this theory. So, but a lot of people after the war didn't make those conclusions. Said, oh, these grand battles still important, just ignoring the fact that actually the Russian fleet was most of the battles very passive. That's what we have already described. Today, navies should consider the factors of leadership and training. Japanese were much better trained, and the Russian, lots of examples, the Russian Navy sailors were not prepared. Growing roles of advanced naval capabilities, including in continental and offshore operations, need to adapt battlefield tactics to new technologies and new lethal arms, and a crucial role of logistical planning and maintaining supply lines over vast distances. Intelligence gathering, very important. Reconnaissance, later on during World War I, certain lessons were learned and actually were used in the naval encounters of the First World War. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm not a historian. I'm a political scientist, and my focus generally is on international security and military strategy with a focus on China and also Russia. I have a book actually coming out with Professor Kozyrev on Russia-China relations. And that book does talk a lot about the importance to Japan and the U.S.-Japan alliance of developments in the China-Russia quasi-alliance. I'll come to that in the end. On any given day, though, I'm pretty focused on the situation of Taiwan Strait. We'll come to that as well, where some predict, some kind of massive naval conflagration in the future. I think that maybe is somewhat relevant to our deliberations here today. But I'm also, of course, following developments in U.S.-Russian relations, which are somewhat dramatic these days, to say the least, and following the day-to-day war underway in Ukraine. And here, I think many of us are probably struck by the parallel that the Russian Navy indeed is on the back foot. I believe the Black Sea Fleet has lost something like a quarter or even a third of its ships, which is quite a stunning achievement for the Ukrainians, undertaken in no small part with our assistance. Anyway, I'm very pleased to and thankful to Grant Road for this great opportunity. I think if I can, I'm afraid that my evidence is rather sparse, so I don't know that you will learn so much from my discussion, but my involvement with the Russian Navy actually was quite extensive for a period early in my career while I was working for the U.S. Naval War College. They didn't have many Russia specialists, and this was a period right after September 11th where there was quite a warming in U.S.-Russian relations. I had the opportunity on several visits actually to spend a good amount of time at the Russian Central Naval Museum, which is up here on the upper right. Subsequently, it's moved to another facility. I'll get into that. Here in the center, you see that was he got fired recently, probably for the Black Sea failures, but there he is visiting actually this same museum where I spent some time. But in this museum, we see, it really is a magnificent museum. Although I'll probably say some not particularly some unfriendly things about it a little bit today, because I guess my bottom line here is that it really neglects this war, and we can probably, given what our last speakers have said, that it is a very deep humiliation to the Russian people, to the Russian military, to the Russian Navy in particular, of course. So, one may expect that, somewhat logically or understandably anyway, as professionals, or scholars, we may wish it otherwise, but there is a certain neglect here, as I'll portray. But nevertheless, I do, those of you who, if you ever get to St. Petersburg, I do want to commend the professionalism of the people at the museum, the historians in general, and I would just say, for example, and I want to be very clear, I was not there studying the Russo-Japanese War. I was there looking more at the orientation of the Russian fleet during the Cold War, when they gave the U.S. Navy, let's say, we could say a run for our money across the world's oceans. But one of the most interesting aspects of this was the way the Russian Navy developed aviation, as you can see. And this was a very different approach than we used. And you might look at this fighter here, Yak 141, and I was fortunate to meet one of their pilots, and we developed some research even that I'll talk about in a minute, where we got to try to fully understand this Russian approach. But why do I bring this up? Because it turns out one of our key aircraft, the F-35B, does use actually some of the technologies from this Yak 141, it's thought, and moreover, as we deliberate about Russia-Chinese potential naval collaboration, of course, I think it's probably not a coincidence that China has reported itself to have acquired this Yak 141. So if we see a Chinese vertical takeoff fighter, which we might, it's uncertain, it will likely have this Russian origin, as do many of China's leading naval weapons. And it's quite a fearsome setup. That's another discussion, but think of weapons like the YJ-18 anti-ship cruise missile. This is probably far superior to what our Navy has in the fleet now, unfortunately. To come to some of this history, and again, I'm not a historian, although I'm really fascinated by this war, and I dare say I might be the only one in the room who's walked all around Port Arthur and explored various aspects of it. Of course, today that's in contemporary China near the big city of Dalian. It also happens to be a Chinese naval base. By the way, I might just add on that point that they have, I think the Chinese have done a decent job at preserving the Japanese war monuments, that is the monuments to the many Japanese soldiers killed there and Russians. And that I think is positive. We can talk more about that. Today, or at least when I was there, it was viewed as a closed city. That is, you had to have special permission to go into this city. And I managed to bribe a cab driver to get my special permission. Anyway, that's another story. But this is the kind of dramatic scene that you see when you walk into the museum. And some of you who know just a little bit about the Russian Navy may appreciate that that is actually Peter the Great's little boat that he came to learn sailing and become quite obsessed with sailing and maritime power. Early in Peter's life, he had gone to Russia's only port at the time, which was up in the Arctic, in Arkhangelsk. This would have been in the 1680s, I think. And what was the fleet that he beheld in Arkhangelsk? It wasn't the Russian fleet. There wasn't the Russian fleet. Maybe a few fishing skiffs or something. No, it was the Dutch fleet. The Dutch whaling fleet and the English whaling fleet. So he, kind of took in that scene, and from that point on, any of you who know about Peter the Great or Peter the First, you'll know that he was truly obsessed with naval power. And I think I would submit that even today we're kind of, as it were, harvesting the fruits of this. Not only did he send the Danish navigator Bering across to explore what today we know as the Bering Strait, which bears on our shores, that we share this strait with Russia, but also we ought to realize that his, I'll say it again, obsession with gaining warm water ports on the Black Sea, let's say, in no small part explained the war that we are somewhat engaged in ourselves today in the Black Sea. You can see there a Swedish flag, clearly a battle trophy taken in the war against Sweden, and that really is Peter the Great's, as it were, finest moment, certainly in Russian eyes. And no doubt the current occupant in the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin, sees himself in part as a Peter the Great who's trying to deliver victory for the Russian people. You don't see any Japanese flag there, right? Yeah, and that tells you something right away. It's not among those proud moments. The Russian Navy does, kind of have their highs and lows, and although it's not a small amount of devastating loss and catastrophe, in World War II, of course, the museum pays a lot of attention to World War II, and on the 80th anniversary here, we're about to see a lot of discussion of Russian memorializing of the Great Patriotic War, as they call it, and the bulk of the museum concerns this. Here's I think an engagement, probably in those waters off of Norway when they're working hard against the German aircraft and submarines that were trying to stop the convoys. Maybe you know the story of PQ-17. Anyway, one last word here on my collaboration with them. Though we were actually working with the Russian Central Naval Museum faculty. We were able to publish a special series on the Cold War at sea, and they did a wonderful job. And you can look in the Journal of Strategic Studies there in 2005. For example, I was able to get one of those specialists there who had been a submarine captain in the Cuban Missile Crisis to write about his experiences, which that's some pretty remarkable history. So let's just say the collaboration paid off well for U.S. Naval War College. Now, when you enter that one room, and my recollection is it is only one, right? And that again tells you something. I think there's at least 5 or 6 major halls devoted to the Second World War, and it's worth noting that in the Second World War there were no major naval engagements undertaken by the Russian fleet. So, okay, so you get the idea. This is not something that the Russian Navy wants to talk about. By the way, that is me at Port Arthur. Of course, that's in China. But you do have a rather nice 3D scale map of the Port Arthur battle. And as Tali said, I think they take some solace in the fact that they inflicted a lot of casualties on the assaulted Japanese. I guess there's some kind of echo across the times of that battle at Sevastopol in the Crimean War, that Tolstoy wrote about. But you see, I think this is the closest thing to, in that museum that I could find, to my recollection of a kind of vision of the battle. That's not Tsushima Strait, though. That, I believe, is the Yellow Sea battle. And here is the single one, a portrait, or a kind of portrayal, if you will, of the Tsushima Strait battle. This is an interesting painting in particular, I think quite famous in Russia, because that's the Aurora cruiser, which of course played a very major role in the revolution. So it did survive the battle. It limped off actually to the Philippines, so it was under the care of the Americans actually for briefly. But of course Aurora is still there and also part of this museum actually, so you can visit that. You know, to play this out just a little bit of what is in this hall, this is on the bottom is one engagement where the Russians succeeded in sinking, I think, a Japanese troop transport, and above is a Japanese battleship sinking, actually hit by a mine. So the Japanese did have some naval losses, but yeah, compared to what the Russians suffered. But I just want to emphasize, nowhere in the display is it kind of, you know, is the depth of this defeat, of this humiliation, really made clear. And so yes, I mean, we could call that, you know, I think misleading would be a polite way probably to even say. But there are some interesting details. You know, for example, this submarine, which I didn't see any combat. Of course, this was the initial period of submarining, so a very interesting period for those interested in undersea warfare. And yet, it apparently was brought over on the train, which is kind of extraordinary to think about too. Now, I just, in closing, make a few final comments here. That, I mean, I do want to say that you might term this the forgotten war in Russia in a way, and yet it's not forgotten. It's so painful. It actually does come up frequently, and I do read a lot of Russian military. I also read Chinese military journals, but read both. And in Russian military journals, it's amazing actually how often. And that's one reason I want to take up this topic, because it's pretty extraordinary how much they do talk about, say, the Battle of Tsushima Strait, and they get very interested in the details down to the, you know, where was the mistake of the maneuvers, you know, what was the critical, what was most critically missing in Russian preparations. And, you know, I don't have to explain that the chief lesson, of course, for the Russians is, you know, prepare, and prepare more, because the enemy is coming. So, you know, so yes, I do think this, in a way, does feed a kind of professional ethic, you know, a determination not to see another Tsushima. Now, there's some pretty spicy material also that you could find, you know, including in some of the Russian military journals that I read. I guess I'll just let you read this. So, you know, and this is a common thread in Russian thinking, and you know, and I do think it behooves us to remember that you don't have to have a PhD in strategy to draw a line between the Port Arthur attack and Pearl Harbor. You know, it was. I think the Japanese were hoping this would be a repeat, basically, of their stunning victory in 1904, 1905, and more recently, you also see. I'd say, I wouldn't call this a cottage industry there, but some Russian strategists saying, you know, look, we need to look at the lessons of the Russo-Japanese war for Ukraine. And I'll be very interested to hear what's said on the next panel about kind of peacemaking, because I think it behooves us to consider how peace was eventually made in that war. Of course, that's on all our minds now. I guess I'll just close my remarks by saying, there was I think, quite a brilliant essay by this Commander Scarborough. I think he may have been a instructor at Top Gun or something, but I don't know a lot about him. But he makes the case that the United States itself, the U.S. Navy, is actually drifting toward its own Tsushima. Well, that's a pretty dramatic thought. I had it myself, and so I was a little bit interested to see that I'm not the only one who's had this thought, and I'm somebody who follows the naval balance very closely in the Western Pacific. And this is just from the other day, from the Chinese exercise. You can see on that H-6 bomber, it is flying with an interesting weapon there. It's a hypersonic anti-ship missile. So we don't have that, folks, in our Navy, but the Chinese do. And it's probably not a leap to suggest they got that with Russian help. So anyway, it's a major concern, and apparently I'm not the only one who has this concern. Now, let me end on a more positive note, though. I do think Russia-Japan relations are critically important to the global order, to the future of the Asia-Pacific, for the future of peace in Asia-Pacific. And one idea I've had, and I wrote this article in the middle there, appeared in late December there, where I was advocating that actually the Arctic has good potential to kind of divert Russia's energies from a kind of militaristic expansion to more, let's say, more peaceful commercial pursuits. There's no doubt that Putin cares a lot about the Arctic, and that the Arctic Sea Route could become a way to kind of bring many of the powers together, including Japan. Japan clearly has a vital interest in the Arctic, so it seems to me, as we consider Russia-Japan relations in the future, we may indeed hope that that relationship improves. And I'll just end by saying that the late Shinzo Abe, who was tragically assassinated in 2022, that one of his foremost legacies is that he had advocated strongly for rapprochement in Russia-Japan relations. So I think actually, while I know many strategists will be skeptical and say, well, that would be terrible, but my own view is that that would benefit Japan, and it would also, in my view, benefit the United States. So just one last thing I'll say is this book will be out in January 2026, and we do talk about all these issues, including the vital role of the Arctic for future world economy and future world politics in general. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it.